Oh hi, I'm Quince, and welcome to the 8th in my series of reviews for Season 1 of the Playdate, Panic's handheld gaming console. Each week, 2 brand new games from different developers appear like magic on your Playdate system, and Week 8's games are Star Sled and Saturday Edition. We are starting off with Star Sled, which was developed by none other than Panic themselves. That's right, this one is an in-house game design from the creators of the Playdate, so you'd imagine that it takes advantage of the Playdate's features in order to really show off the hardware in a cool way. Well, it's a retro-style flying spaceship game, and it does utilize the crank heavily, as that is your primary control input. You'll rotate the crank in order to change your ship's direction, and as you do, you'll notice a line protruding from the back of your ship wherever you go. With that line, your goal is to encircle sparks completely in order to capture them. The game is structured as a series of missions, each one requiring you to capture a certain number of sparks within a given time limit, and yes, new gameplay elements are introduced as you progress, such as a speed boost, or even the ability to capture multiple sparks at a time. There are enemies you'll have to avoid, but the biggest challenge in Star Sled is maneuvering your ship safely as you weave in and out of spark-filled zones. Crashing into anything results in instant death and having to restart the mission from scratch. You'll discover quickly why the game is called Star Sled as opposed to, say, Star All-Terrain Vehicle. The control feels slippery, like you're ice skating on a rink full of stars, and it can be quite tricky to loop around sparks without hitting anything, especially as the levels get busier with more obstacles. You've got to make some very tight maneuvers. It's some real Top Gun Maverick type stuff. It's hard for me not to compare Star Sled to Hyper Meteor, the other big top-down space game that looks sort of like Asteroids but isn't Asteroids from a couple weeks back. The structure of the two games is very different, one being a simple single-level score chaser, the other being a longer multi-mission game where you progress through different levels, but the foundation of flying a ship around with the crank is the same, and it's hard for me to ignore just how much better that feels in Hyper Meteor. In that game, the ship always faces the exact direction the crank is in. It's very consistent. In Star Sled, the ship turns a lot faster, the control feels a lot looser, and I found it much more difficult to predict when I should start my turn in any given situation. Frequently, I find myself turning too early or too late and crashing. I think that looseness is part of Star Sled's intentional design. It's something that you're supposed to get used to and feel better about the more you play, but I found it pretty frustrating no matter how much time I put into the game. The graphics don't do much to help things out either. It's doing that retro arcade thing, but it just isn't that pleasant to look at in my opinion. Like Questy Chess from last week, it's this very monochromatic look that for me is a turnoff. I'm all for retro throwbacks, but there's gotta be something more there. And sometimes I honestly found it a little bit hard to tell what was going on or where certain barriers were, what I could or couldn't crash into, or how close I was exactly to connecting with an obstacle because of those limited graphics. I do like that this isn't just another score chaser. As I keep mentioning, there is a progression from mission to mission, adding in new functions and mechanics, and for the most part, successfully. I liked clearing those missions, I liked discovering the new features that they introduced. It gives you something to unlock, it gives you something to work towards and look forward to. And the missions are pretty varied, they definitely don't feel repetitive. There are plenty of cool ideas that pop up as you play. There's also a much appreciated Zen mode, which allows you to zoom around freely, capturing sparks and running into things to your heart's content. It's a great change of pace, especially after repeatedly crashing into sparks and dying in the main mode. So I like a lot of things in Star Sled in theory, but it's those controls that hold me back from loving it. It's possible that if I spend more time with the game, it'll start to click with me, and I could change my mind on it. Maybe in a future update, they'll even adjust the controls a little bit. But as it stands, it's just a frustrating experience because I find it so difficult to get my ship to do what I want it to do. There are absolutely flashes of fun and joy in this game. I just wish they weren't so few and far between. Taking a complete 180 from Star Sled, now I'm looking at Saturday Edition, developed by Wild Rose. This is a throwback to one of my favorite video game genres of all time, the point-and-click adventure game. While there is no pointing, the buttons do make a clicking sound. You play as John Cornfield, like Cornfield with a K, a man who claims to have been abducted by aliens and returned back to Earth in the 70s. Now he just exists as kind of a weird loner working in security systems, but he gets wrapped up in a new mystery when strange disappearances start to occur in the area. I won't say much more about that because, of course, this is a game that lives and dies on its story and characters, and I wouldn't want to ruin anything. We've seen narratives in other Playdate games like Casual Birder and Lost Your Marbles, but for the most part, those were a means to an end. Segments to enjoy in between gameplay sequences, just generally lighter, fluffier, less memorable than other more dedicated narratives. Saturday Edition is the first thing I've played on the system that's worth experiencing for the writing alone. The tone lives somewhere in the realm of The X-Files, Twin Peaks, and The Vast of Night. It's very understated, not flashy at all, with most of the big reveals and plot points coming through dialogue and hints of what's just beyond your reach as the player. In other words, it uses the limitations of the Playdate very much to its advantage, creating a compelling narrative by highlighting the things you don't see and letting you fill in the blanks with your own imagination. Like I said, this is an adventure game and it is a throwback, but it's not trying to replicate those older games exactly. You control John with the D-pad, and when you're in front of something you can interact with, you can press A to check it out, or open up your inventory to try to use an item in conjunction with said thing. There's no combining items with each other, and no other verbs or actions to worry about when looking at people or objects in the world, which cuts down on a lot of the possible headaches that have been seen in other games like this. And the game's world is relatively small. If you get stuck, it's pretty easy to travel to every location you have available and just try everything you've got until you figure out how to progress. Personally, I've got no problem with weird, convoluted puzzles from time to time. I kind of enjoy them, but this game is probably better off without them, instead propelling you forward on the strengths of the plot alone. It's definitely more than just an interactive novel, but it sometimes feels something like that, and I mean that in the best way possible. For a relatively small game, both in scope and map size, Saturday Edition does a great job creating a larger world in your mind. Backgrounds and character designs are simple, but they find surprising and creative ways to flesh them out. Anytime you talk to someone or interact with an object, a little square pops up that shows you a zoomed-in view of what you're interacting with. Whether you're seeing a person's face or watching a door handle turning, it's a small flourish that goes a long way toward making the game feel alive and giving you a more detailed look at what's going on. I would talk more about Saturday Edition, but again, I really don't want to spoil anything for anyone who hasn't played it, and the true joys of this game do mostly come from the mystery and how it unfolds, and just generally the tone and style that I really connected with. I was definitely an easy mark for this game, I'll admit. There was very little chance I wasn't going to love it, because it does combine so many of my favorite genres, both in games and storytelling in general. But aside from my own biases, I do think it's an extremely well put together story. I could have done with maybe a few more intricate puzzles and a little less linearity, but that's by no means a deal breaker. This one is shooting right up to the top of my list of favorite Season 1 games. If you like sci-fi or noir at all, I think it'll leave a great impression on you, just like it did for me. I'm sure it's apparent from my reviews already, but Star Sled was a slight letdown for me. I feel kind of bad comparing it to Hypermeteor because they are different in many ways, but I just can't shake how stiff the controls feel to me. On the other hand, Saturday Edition, totally different kind of game. For me, it's an instant classic right in my wheelhouse, and I would love to have more games on the Playdate from that studio or just in that genre. But hey, what do I know? Let me know what you think of these games in the comments if you've had the chance to play them. And if you want, you can also find more of my reviews of the other Season 1 Playdate games right here on this channel, which you could subscribe to so you don't miss any of them. Thanks for watching, everybody, and I'll see you next week.